In the 1930s, there was no PPSH-GO. In 1986, one of the highest-rated programs in American television history aired. Over 30 million people watched the 2-hour live broadcast. What do you think it was? A sporting event? Political debates? No. Viewers watched, holding their breath, as workers in the basement of a Chicago nightclub broke into a secret room belonging to the famous gangster Al Capone. 40 years had passed since his death, but the figure of the king of the criminal world still caused unprecedented excitement. What was behind that wall? Millions in cash? Very possible. That's why agents from the Federal Tax Service stood alongside the journalists. Or perhaps the bodies of Al Capone's unfortunate enemies. That option wasn't ruled out either, which is why a medical examiner was present. Finally, the wall came down. People rushed inside, but instead of a secret treasure, they found only dirt and a few dirty bottles. Thus, the most anticipated broadcast of the year instantly became the biggest disappointment. People clearly wanted more, because this wasn't about some ordinary bandit, but about the man who became the symbol of organized crime in America. His name alone promised intrigue and action. So, let's see how the simple son of Italian immigrants managed to become a trendsetter in the criminal world and earn the official status of public enemy number one. Alphonse Gabriel Capone. Not without reason was he called the most ruthless criminal of the 1920s. He was the one who turned Chicago into the most dangerous city in America. But he was born far from that place. Capone was born in 1899 in New York City to law-abiding Italian immigrant parents. He had 7 brothers and sisters. Was he doomed to become a gangster from childhood? A difficult question. On one hand, 2 other Capone brothers would join the gang. On the other hand, no matter the circumstances, everyone chooses their own fate. Why am I so sure of this? Well, a final unexpected twist awaits you at the end. For now, let's see what young Alphonse was like. From childhood, he stood out for his good organizational skills, love of fame, and unbridled cruelty. He was expelled from school at 14 after a fight with a teacher. He decided he'd had enough education and plunged headfirst into the street life of Brooklyn. But it wouldn't be accurate to say he immediately became a hardened criminal. For the first few years, he combined the life of a small-time hoodlum with a legitimate job as a paper cutter at a munitions factory. He also became quite good at playing pool and baseball, even performing in semi-professional leagues. But then, fate brought him together with a man named Johnny Torrio. Here he is. This seemingly modest and well-mannered gentleman was actually one of the most influential crime bosses in New York. He saw potential in the young Al Capone and asked a friend to get him a job as a bouncer at his nightclub. They were just looking for a bouncer, and the stocky guy was perfect for the role. Thus, Capone became involved in the nightlife of the metropolis, where he had to deal with petty thieves, gangsters, and the city's unofficial rulers every day. But this job left him with 2 unpleasant gifts. First, Al Capone contracted syphilis from a prostitute. Second, he was slashed across the face with a knife. He made too crude a compliment to a female club guest. Unfortunately, her brother was nearby, the old mobster Frank Galluccio. Capone refused to apologize, so Frank, without thinking twice, pulled out a knife and slashed the bouncer across the cheek. They were pulled apart before it turned into a serious knife fight. But from then on, Capone had a long scar on his left cheek, which earned him the famous nickname Scarface. But God forbid you call Al Capone that to his face. The gangster was ashamed of this story and embarrassed by the scar his whole life. That's why, in all official photographs, he faces the camera with his other cheek. He even invented a legend that he actually received the wound fighting on the fronts of World War I, although he not only never saw the front, but never even served in the army. Then an event occurred that almost stopped Capone's criminal career. He got married and became a father. His choice was the Irish girl May Coughlin. They even had to ask their parents' permission to marry, as neither of the newlyweds was 21 yet. Al Capone's father gave his consent only on one condition: his son had to leave the criminal world and find a normal job. Capone respected his father very much, so he didn't dare disobey. As a result, the young family moved to Baltimore, and the former bouncer got a job as an accountant at a construction firm. Their family happiness was marred by only one thing. Their son was born with congenital syphilis. With age, he was cured, but unfortunately, he grew up practically deaf. However, this did not prevent him from living until 2004. But Capone's honest life lasted less than 2 years. In 1920, his father died, and sometime later, his old acquaintance, Johnny Torrio, found him with an offer he couldn't refuse. Here, a brief digression is needed. While Capone was peacefully working as an accountant, the criminal world did not stand still. Johnny Torrio moved to Chicago to his boss, Big Jim Colosimo, who had opened several brothels in the city. But at that time, Chicago was suffering from a whole epidemic of extortion by the so-called Black Hand Gang. It wasn't so much a gang as a method of extortion invented by Italian immigrants. It worked like this. One fine day, a note would fall into your mailbox saying something like, "Bring a suitcase of money to the park at night, or you'll regret it." How real the threat was remained a mystery, because everyone was involved in this kind of blackmail, from organized gangs to dumb kids from the neighborhood. Big Jim's business suffered especially badly from such threats, as most people considered running brothels despicable. To deal with the problem, Jim called Torrio for help, and he dealt with it. More precisely, he began shooting all the extortionists indiscriminately so that no one would even think about blackmail. After that, business took off. Big Jim opened one brothel after another. His clubs became elite night spots that even famous people weren't ashamed to visit. One of the guests was the famous singer Enrico Caruso, and it was in one of these establishments that Torrio invited Capone to work. It was here, in Chicago, that the young gangster's career skyrocketed. Just as Capone turned 20, the infamous Prohibition began in the United States. This event, more than anything else, influenced the rise of modern organized crime. What changed with Prohibition? Did people drink less? No. The price of alcohol soared tenfold, and gangsters began mastering a new profession en masse: bootlegging, the illegal production and smuggling of alcohol. In the end, Torrio invited his boss for one final conversation. But Big Jim never made it. He was killed on the way. One popular version claims that Al Capone himself had a hand in this. Be that as it may, the gang was now led by Johnny Torrio, and Capone became his right-hand man. A global redistribution of the illegal alcohol market began in Chicago. But for successful contraband trade, another essential condition was needed: protection from the police and politicians. And sometimes it went beyond just bribes or sponsoring election campaigns, even extending to forceful interference in elections. The peak of this lawlessness was the 1924 municipal elections in Cicero, a major suburb of Chicago where Torrio's gang headquarters was located. All key positions there were held by long-bribed Republicans, but few ordinary residents liked the blatant power of the Italian criminals. So, the Republicans were at risk of losing the upcoming elections. How do you win when the whole city is against you? Increase campaigning? Hold a charity event? Why bother when you can just force everyone to vote for the right candidate? On election day, Torrio and Capone brought out more than 200 gangsters. First, they smashed the Democratic Party headquarters and beat up the candidates. Then, they went to polling stations and strongly recommended voters to vote for the people's candidate. If someone refused, their ballots were taken, they were beaten, and thrown out of the polling stations. Several people were killed. Al Capone's older brother, Frank, personally led an attack on the Democrats' meeting place, leaving no living space on the building. The gangsters also kidnapped more than 20 Democratic campaigners and locked them in a basement until the elections were over. Local authorities turned a blind eye to any outrage because this very lawlessness helped them win elections. But eventually, someone reported the ongoing chaos to the sheriff in Chicago, and 100 policemen were hastily sent from there. It almost came to street battles, and the gang also suffered losses. In one shootout, Frank Capone was killed, but the gangsters still achieved their goal. The Republicans won the elections, and Cicero remained under Al Capone's influence until the very end of his criminal career. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the like button so you don't miss part 2.